I thought it was appropriate that we talk about leaky basements a little bit today, because that is what's been going on in my world. So we'll start with our first question. And the first question is, you represent the seller. After all the rain, the seller calls you and says, hey, I just wanted to let you know, we noticed some dampness in the basement. It's not a big deal. We already cleaned it up. How do you respond? And since it wasn't a big deal, should you ignore the issue?
No, you shouldn't ignore the issue, and you should do a seller's disclosure addendum.
That's right. And I have this question a lot where something happens. It doesn't have to be a leaky basement, but something happens. And the seller's disclosure statement needs to be changed. And oftentimes people will say, agents will say, well, I'm just going to have them change it on the original. You shouldn't do that, because the original is already out there and in the hands of other people, and it's going to be dated when you made the change. So preferably you do it on the amendment as Kathy stated. Okay. Anybody have questions about that? Carol, you're muted.
There you go. I'm supposed to be getting a condo to list over in Webster. And there are like 4 units in each building, and the buildings are connected. The first building is right off of Marshall, and that sits in the floodplain, the flash floodplain, which of course it did last week. So the rest of the condos, the condo that I'm getting is not in the floodplain. Does that have to be disclosed?
So it's a different building, not the one that had the flash flood.
Well, they're all connected in a way, but there are 4 in each buildings, and the buildings are actually, I don't quite understand it. I need to go over and really look.
I would. And here's the thing. I mean, it might only happen when it's a flash flood, but if it does happen or it did happen, I would disclose.
Yeah, obviously the condo association, they make them carry flood insurance because that first unit is in the floodplain.
Yeah, I would definitely, I'd hike over there, and probably because the homeowner or the HOA is requiring the extra flood insurance, that would be something to disclose for sure.
Okay, cool.
Great question though. Okay, number 2, you represent the buyer. During the building inspection notice period, we have a torrential rain. You have already submitted the inspection notice to the listing agent. So what does that mean? Because it's already submitted, we're not supposed to go back in, right? The buyer, so your buyer calls you and says, hey, I'd like to go over and look at that basement since we've had this torrential rain. Do you tell the buyer, sorry, we can't go back in the house until the final walkthrough? Anybody want to answer that? Because this actually happened.
No, I think you should go back, but you should tell them what the conditions are under which the deadline is for the inspection notice, and if they want to make a request for some repairs, I think you could submit the request.
Right. So do we have entitlement to go back because we've submitted the inspection notice? The answer is no. However, when your buyer asks you to do that, you need to do your due diligence. And the answer is no, we can't go, or no, that's not how it works. The answer is, let me see what I can do. And I want you to email the listing agent and say, hey, since we've had all this rain, my buyer wants to go back through and make sure everything's okay. Now they could decline to let you go back in, but now you have your CYA there because you've requested to go back through. So the answer is no. you call the listing agent and make the request. And I wrote as the answer, in fact, send an email to the agent, and you should keep that request in your file. So we had our agent do that. She went, and the listing agent let the buyers go through, and sure enough, there was water in the basement. Now,
Were they able to ask for repairs?
well, yes, and here's why. Because the house is supposed to be in the condition it was on the day you wrote the offer. And on their seller's disclosure statement, it said the basement didn't leak. Well, now it does. So we have a difference. And you know what? Discovering that before, what if they would have gone in there and cleaned it all up and we didn't notice it? We did final walkthrough and didn't notice it. And guess what happens? 2 days later, we have a bunch of rain and now we've got water. So it's a lot easier to remedy that type of situation before it closes, rather than have to potentially have a lawsuit.
So since the inspection notice was already submitted, how do you handle that? Do you take back the inspection notice and add that
Right,
on, or do you do an
we
amendment?
actually, that's a great question. We actually resubmitted another inspection notice
Okay,
because we
and
wanted.
probably had to
checked.
extend the timeline or
Mhm.
something.
Yeah, and guys, there's a lot of older homes in St. Louis that don't have the sub pump pit and the tile around the foundation. And if it doesn't, I'd probably bet it's gonna leak, right? You've got all that pressure up against the wall. So when you're writing an offer, those are things to take into consideration.
Sure.
So Lynn,
Yeah,
so you're basically giving the buyer 2 inspection periods now?
yep, they granted that. Mhm.
Wow.
They did. We were lucky.
Yeah,
Yep.
but sometimes you're not. I know that my problem is that trying to convince or explain to buyers what the rules are in terms of the deadline. But by
Mhm.
and large, everyone thinks the way they want to think and do what they want to do. I had one client that we went over the building inspection issues. We submitted them. She came back and says, "Oh, I want to add something else to it," a couple of days
Mhm.
later. And it's like, well, I explained what the rules were, but we went ahead and submitted the request that you wanted for the additional repairs anyway. And the agent they rejected them.
Mhm. That's what I want you to do though, Everett. You did the right thing. You were 100% correct. If your buyer asks you to do something, you comply. I don't care what the rules say. That's typical. That's not how we do it. You can explain that, but I still want you to make the request to the seller.
Mhm.
Okay. All right. So number 3, you represent the buyer. They write an offer and it's accepted. They do not have a checking account. Can they get a check from their parents for the earnest money?
I think so.
Who said that?
Diane,
What'd you say?
why don't they just go to the bank and get a cashier's check?
They can.
But I've never seen a parent get a check, but anyway, they're buying a house, they need to have a checking.
think that-
account or something.
We've had it happen multiple
Mhm.
times where
Mhm.
parents will kick in, they're gonna help somehow, and then they think that that's,
Mhm. I guess my caution to all of this is pay attention. My answer to this question, when I got it, you better check with the lender and make sure it's okay.
Right.
Because the lender could say, whoa, wait a minute, where'd that money come from and how are you gonna pay it back?
yeah.
So the cashier's check clearly is, the easiest thing. But I know today, these younger people don't even know what a check is or know how to fill it out. It's not on their radar. They're using Venmo and all that other stuff. And some of the title companies are agreeing to do that, hold the earnest money at some sort of, what's that called? It's like a wire. Where there's no check
Trust
written.
funds?
Yes, that's it. Thank you. I knew to start with the T, trust funds. Yeah. So that's another option for you. But getting money from parents like that, just be careful because the lender may not like it. Okay. All right, number 4. You represent the seller. You have an accepted offer and the negotiations are complete. Don't you love these photos that Jamie throws in here? You can just see it happening, right?
Mm,
I think we've seen it on the news.
Terrifying.
Right?
mm.
In the news.
We haven't, okay, so we just had 11 inches of rain. This could be a U City house because that's what's happening. The seller calls and tells you their basement is completely flooded and they have over 4 feet of water. Now what? Anybody want to try to take that on?
By boat.
Yeah, give them a boat with the house.
Yeah. I'm gonna tell you, oftentimes when that happens, that much water, you've also got sewage coming up in there as well. So that takes, that's not just going down there and pumping out water, that's going in and,
Remediating, right?
right, and getting, because of the sewage, probably getting somebody from Woodard or something like that to come in and do that work. So,
And find out what
today-
the rate for it, where it came in, I guess the windows and stuff.
yep.
Um,
So I'm going to tell you what our contract says, and one of the things I asked you to write down was to send me a recruit today. But here's number 2. I want you to go sometime in the next week, get your contract out and go to paragraph 14 under loss and read that in detail. So here's what happens. The seller shall immediately notify the buyer or selling broker in writing of the damage or destruction, the amount of insurance proceeds, if any, and whether the seller intends to restore the property prior to closing to its condition at the time of the contract. So what else should the seller provide?
The addendum to the disclosure.
Mhm. So in the event the seller restores the property to its prior condition before scheduled closing and provides buyer with proof of repairs, the buyer and the seller can proceed to closing. This paragraph can get extremely complicated and there's time frames and all sorts of things. If this happens, I want you to call me. All right, let's not just go, I think we'll do it this way, that way. It's really important, and this could get us in a lawsuit. Okay.
What
so,
if it happens the day before closing?
yeah, it's not going to close, probably. Buyer doesn't want to, who would want to take that on? I wouldn't.
You'd have to move
way.
and you're stopping boats.
Right. So, that's a great question, and this is gonna lead into another portion where I think Mary's going. So we'll move on to number 5. And that is, what happens if the property is not to be restored to its prior condition by the seller before closing? Then what?
Here's the closing date. Amend
You
the closing
could.
date.
Yeah, you could.
Ask for a release and get your money back on inspections.
That's it. So seller shall immediately provide the buyer or selling broker with the copy of any of the policies of the insurance, the name and number of the agent and the said policies, and written authorization from the buyer to communicate with the insurance company. So that's what I'm telling you. This paragraph gets very detailed and you have to read it 2 or 3 times to get it. Make notes on the side about what could happen. So under number 6, we're going to talk about that in more detail. Is the buyer required to close if that happens?
No.
I don't see how they can. I mean, most of these properties are, that are flooding, they're not going to be able to, there's going to be tons of repairs or they're not going to be able to
Right.
get back.
So the buyer can proceed with closing and be entitled to the amount of the insurance proceeds relating to any real property improvements, if any, payable to the seller under the policies ensuring the improvements, plus receive a credit from the seller at closing in an amount equal to the deductible not covered by insurance, or they can terminate the contract.
I'd be terminating their contract.
True.
Most of these people did not have money to even give you. So, they're the ones that,
That's true.
Hey, Lynn,
I
Yep.
terminate the contract.
Yes, Carol?
you also better check with the lender because the house was appraised at a certain condition.
Right.
The lender may require that it gets another appraisal. And you could really have just a bag of snakes there, boy. Wow.
Literally.
Real ones,
Oh.
real ones.
Yeah,
Yeah.
literally. Yeah.
I've got goosebumps thinking about it.
So
It's,
let's go on to number 7. If the contract is terminated, what is the buyer entitled to?
Refund of his earnest money, one thing.
Correct. What else?
Any
They also
inspection money's
get-
paid out.
They also get the cost of anything that they've paid for, survey, title. I think inspections are included, if I remember right.
You're correct. There's one more thing.
Title, survey, inspections, appraisal, what else?
That's it. Yeah. So
Oh, I
that
thought I
could
said
be,
that.
that could be a lot of money depending on the size of the house and that sort of thing. So, yep. So
Well-
again, please go back and read that paragraph carefully, especially with the weather that we've been having the last few days or last week. Houses that have never flooded are flooding.
And you're right, Lynn, when you read that paragraph, there's time frames in there.
Oh,
and
yeah.
You have to read it a couple times before it sinks in because,
Yep.
that it's confusing sometimes.
Yep, and it's probably best to put your dates on one column and when this is due and all
Mhm.
that. Because guess what? I know we're all sitting here thinking, oh, I wouldn't go through with that, but there's buyers out there that might say, oh, I'm willing to deal with that. They might.
We've had it where they've escrowed the money and the buyers, because you think about it, the buyers have a chance to possibly remodel at somebody else's expense if there was something, but we've had a couple we've had probably more that terminate than we have move forward. but-
Yes. Yeah, and there's sellers that try to cover it up, and we have a pending case that our
That was huge.
company's not, yeah, and when I saw that video, it was like clear running water, like a pipe had busted, but that is not the case, and it was a house that was rehabbed, and they knew there was a problem, and the flipper just drywalled over the top of that section of the basement, and then it rained, and then it became a swimming pool. Okay, we'll move on to number 8. You represent the seller of a condo villa. You receive an offer from a buyer's agent and they include the condo writer. How much time does the seller have to notify the appropriate board or management company of the proposed sale? I know
5
we've
days.
covered this a while back, but it keeps coming up.
5 days.
Correct. It is 5. So when you get the listing, I would highly recommend that you get in touch with the board or the management company at the time you list it so that you have their contact information. Oftentimes, it's one of the homeowners in the condo association, and then they're going to be on vacation for 10 days. So now we're under the gun. We got an offer and we can't get a hold of anyone. So get in touch with them ahead of time, get all that contact information from your seller. Okay, what happens in the event that the board or the management company provides incomplete information or none at all? What should the seller provide?
Their HOA contact info.
You can
No,
do that.
They should prepare a statement knowing what they know to the best of their knowledge.
That's right. So they need to prepare and submit to the buyer a substitute form containing the information to the best of their knowledge. So you want to make sure this is why it's really, I want to hammer home at the listing, get the information ahead of time, the contact. We don't necessarily wanting them to fill out the form. We just need their contact, because what if the condo's on the market for 60 days and during that 60-day period, someone falls and breaks their leg and they take legal action of some sort. Now we have an outdated form. That's why you don't want to do it in advance, too far in advance. Okay, let's do number 9. You represent the buyer. You have an accepted contract and completed the inspections. This really happened the other day. There is a financing contingency and you have 10 days before the loan commitment deadline. You receive a telephone call from your buyer. They were injured while working in their yard. I think they were working on their lawnmower, actually. They cannot work and their employer will not pay them while they're out of work. They want to know, should you call the listing agent and explain what happened to the buyer? Do you call the lender? What would you do?
Both.
I would call the lender first.
Yeah. I do both, I think.
So I don't want you to do anything until you have it in writing from your buyer giving you permission to disseminate that information, if that makes sense. We are not supposed to disclose confidential information, and that probably falls under that category. So until you receive something in writing from the buyer with instructions. So in this scenario, the buyer was able to terminate the contract because the lender would not approve their loan. You should never disclose a buyer or seller personal information to anyone without express written consent. So on that case, the agent called me and said, well, I thought I'd call you first because I was going to call the agent and tell him we're going to walk because he got hurt. And I said, no, not do that. It actually turned out better to get the decline from the lender instead of us telling them what happened. They don't need to know all that. It's
Yeah,
personal.
I would probably really just tell the buyer to call your lender and let them know what's going on.
Exactly. That's great advice, Julia. Yep. All right. So number 10, you represent the seller. You receive an offer from an agent that is purchasing the property for themselves. So it's an agent writing on a property that they're going to own it themselves, probably going to move in. They write in the special agreements paragraph, buyer is purchasing the property and hereby is waiving their commission, thus the reduction in the asking price. Is that okay?
No.
Yeah, you guys got that. All right. And the answer is no, because the MREC does not allow commissions to be negotiated in the sale contract. So in this case, if your seller was willing to accept the offer, what do you have to do?
Make an amendment and take it out.
What else?
A commission agreement.
Correct. What else?
You have to disclose on the contract that you're an agent also.
Correct. Yep. What do we have to do with the seller?
Let them know what's going on, I guess.
A listing contract amendment to a
That's it.
commission.
Bingo, you got it. So we have to do a listing amendment, changing the commission, that we're reducing the commission to whatever that percentage is. But when you do that, I want you to do it for that buyer only on that listing amendment. Because if that deal doesn't go through, it falls apart, now you would be stuck with that lowered commission. If that happens and you wanted me to help you go through the process, I'm happy to do that. But this just happened and we were lucky that the seller didn't hold us to it, because they could have. because we didn't write in there for this specific buyer only, that the commission would be reduced. So if the deal fell apart, the seller has you committed to just your portion of the commission. All right. I think my paper ran out here. Okay, I'm just gonna read off the screen. Jamie, if you want to move forward.
Lynn,
Yep.
on that commission agreement sets out, I mean, it's a good idea to put it on the listing amendment as well, but on that, and I guess if you're, never mind.
Okay, I know where you were going, but I know what you were gonna say. Yep. Okay, so number 11, you represent the buyer. Sewer Pros conducted an inspection and suggested very specific repairs. Because it's a conflict of interest for them to make the repairs, they suggested 2 different companies. You send the listing agent the inspection notice and the video of the necessary repairs. You write in the inspection notice, seller to repair the sewer lateral issues according to the attached report. Is that okay?
No.
Why not?
Well, you gotta say that you want them to sell it, to pay for it and repair for it, and to choose a company, and you want to have a warranty and all that stuff along with
Lien
it.
waivers, yep. So I'm going to tell you what happened in this case. There were Sewer Pros recommended 2 very reputable companies to do the repair work. But our agent didn't write that in. I want this company to do the repairs because we know them. We know they do a good job. We know they're going to look at the video, etc. That our agent failed to do that. So the seller calls ABC Mike's Sewer Company. They come out, they pull the roots, they do the roots, but they don't fix the actual cast iron. This blew up the day before closing because they were running behind, and we did ask to see the video once they had the work completed. And that's when we discovered there were still cracks in the cast iron. So I want to talk to you today was this isn't just the only thing that's been happening. We need to be specific about the company who does the work. So the buyer requests X company to complete the work on the inspection notice. And then, like Rita said, the sellers to provide paid receipts, lien waivers, and re-video the lateral line to the buyer's satisfaction. If you just say, run the video, period, and what happens if you see other items? So it's to the buyer's satisfaction. I want to talk to you because this happened a few years ago. We had an agent, newer agent, and wrote an inspection notice about replacing a roof. Seller to replace the roof. Well, guess what the seller did? They didn't tear off the original roofing. They just simply added another layer and went to Lowe's, and there was a big stack of red shingles sitting in the corner on clearance sale. And that's what they bought.
I remember that.
Yeah.
I remember that.
It's one of those I'm not going to forget. We were able to go back and get them to rip it off, but it could have been, honestly, the seller could have said, you didn't ask, you weren't specific. If you have a roofing company that you use and you know they do a great job and they're going to listen to what your requests are, that's what you need to do.
Well, I think it all goes back to if it's not in writing, it's not so. You know, you got to have everything in writing.
Yes. I'm going to say this. If Rita's writing this out and she's thinking, gosh, I've got so much going on here, have your colleague, one of your colleagues, call me, call Jose, call somebody and say, hey, would you read this before I send it over? Make sure I've covered everything. Because you know what? You're so involved in the words of preparing the inspection notice that you might forget something. Okay, so number 12. You represent the seller. The next door neighbor's tree fell on the roof of your listing. Who is responsible?
The seller. The seller's responsible for the repairs.
Okay, so Jamie, can you hit the next on there, please? So it does depend what was the condition of the tree. If the tree was dead and there's been conversation and maybe email exchanged, hey neighbor, your tree's dying and I'm worried it's going to fall on my house, that might go a different way. But overall, and especially in this weather, a good healthy tree could fall on your house, and it could be the neighbors or the fence, could fall on the fence, but it would go onto your seller, even though the tree was in your neighbor's yard. And we can't give legal advice, obviously, but overall, I'm going to tell you that's pretty much how the answer is going to be. Any questions about that?
Lynn,
Yeah.
I had a situation where a tree fell in the back, and the guy next door, it didn't do any damage to anything. And the guy next door immediately called up and said, hey, that's your tree. Well, it wasn't our tree, but we called our insurance guy right away. And he told me that this is the way it goes. If a tree falls and it's your tree, if it doesn't do any damage, it's the other guy's responsibility to clean it up.
Mm-hmm.
But if it does damage, then it's your insurance company that has to take care of the damage.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It didn't matter if it was healthy or dead. I'm sure if it's dead, or if it's a diseased tree or something like that, you're going to be responsible, but it gets real
Well, and I
tricky.
think it has to be, you have to, it's all proof, evidence of it. So,
And probably depends on the insurance company too.
yeah,
Most
probably.
of them will just deny. So
Yeah, and sometimes, it's nice that the person who owns the tree and it fell on your roof, it would be nice if they paid your deductible, but if they don't have to, but it would be nice.
Well, but if they're neglecting trees, like I have neighbors on both sides that don't take care of their yards or anything. So I approached them because they had a group of trees that were starting to fall in my yard. And I said, you need to get it cleaned up, because it was going to hit the garage. So my insurance company told them that, they were responsible, but it just goes, people neglect their yards now, and it's getting bad. But the woman said, well, it's not on my lot. And I said, it is. And she goes, well, there's a fence there. And I said, it's been there for 50 years that I know of. And they didn't just neglect it beyond that. So she said, well, I'm going to call the city. And the city said, their responsibility. So she did end up cutting the trees.
Good.
But I was
Okay.
persistent.
Yeah. All right, we'll move on to number 13. You represent the buyer. As you prepare the inspection notice, the buyer tells you they don't want to ask for a lot on their original request because they want to try to negotiate and may ask for other items later. How do you advise them?
I tell them to write everything on the first time and negotiate it from there.
Okay, because that is the right answer, 100%. And I'm going to tell you, because this just happened night before last. So we're on the last day, we're sitting on the inspection notice. And I said, just so you know, the seller can come back and say, we'll do everything you originally asked us to do on the first inspection notice. So that is why that first one is so important. You can always delete things and renegotiate, do all that, but the first one is the one they can go back to and accept. Any questions about that? Doesn't happen very often, but it just did. So I thought, well, that'll make a good question for today.
If someone
All right.
decides, oh, well, we have second thoughts on that, we want to add something else after you've submitted it. What would you do?
Exactly. That's right. Okay, number 14. You receive a call from a potential seller. They begin the conversation by saying, I need to close on this house by the end of the month. You see a red flag. What's the why? The urgency. Here's why. They haven't paid their property taxes. So I'm going to ask Everett to elaborate on that, because this actually is happening to him, and he jumped in and he's doing a great job. So Everett, what did you do?
Well, the woman that needs to sell her house because of property taxes that are going to be due, putting it on the market immediately, and trying to get in touch with as many investors as possible to try to get a quick sale before the end of the month, but also finding out what the minimum is that has to be paid to avert the tax sale within less than a month.
Right. So typically, what I know about unpaid property tax is they'll start proceedings when you haven't paid 3 years. Is that right, Everett?
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah, you have to pay at least one of those 3 years for them to avert the sale.
Mhm.
I think we might start seeing that in some areas where maybe they've overpaid or they feel like their house hasn't appreciated in value. So thank you for your input on that, Everett, on that issue.
I have a question about that.
Yeah.
I just have never dealt with that before. So if you do have a seller who's in that situation and you're trying to sell it to, maybe it's not an investor, don't those property taxes have to be paid at closing? I mean, we've had some situations where our clients were behind, but they had to pay that at closing.
Yeah, so they'll take it out of the proceeds. I
Okay,
think it might take a little longer to take care of paperwork and giving title and all that, but yes, as long as they have the equity or they bring money to the table. If they had money to bring to the table, I would think they would have paid the taxes. So
mhm.
Yeah, it's better that they take the money out of proceeds than lose the property altogether.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
yeah, okay. Number 15. You represent the buyer. The buyer has a lot of interest and you've been told by the listing agent that you're in a multiple offer situation. Jamie, can you click? Okay, you write the offer, and in these special agreements, you write inspections for informational purposes only. Can your buyer still walk?
Yeah,
Yeah,
they
as
could.
long as you don't remove the verbiage that says that they have that capability.
Right, so Jamie, can you click? Yes, we'll click again. So in this situation, what if you delete paragraph number 10 and write in inspections for informational purposes only? Can your buyer walk?
Nope.
Oh,
So,
yes, they can.
well, if you got Carol,
Not on
the buyer's
inspection.
agent, and she puts on her boxing gloves, it might. So here's what happened, and then I'll ask Carol to elaborate a little bit. All right, can you click, Jamie? So this happened, it got very complicated, and the seller said, you can walk, but we're gonna keep your $10,000 earnest money. And in fact, I think it might have been 25 now that I'm thinking about it.
It was.
This was definitely a battle. However, the seller had several termite issues and did not disclose on the seller's disclosure statement. Our agent won, but before you delete paragraph 10, let's talk about what consequences there could be. Carol, you want to elaborate on your situation?
Well, what happened was that we obviously found some termite damage.
Ooh.
Aaron's Pest, who did a fabulous job finding this, pulled the vent by the front door and pulled away the metal venting that was there so that they could see the sill plate. It was collapsed. In the seller's disclosures, he had indicated that there had been minor termite damage, but it had been taken care of by Rottler Pest Control and had been corrected and had been checked ever since 1993. Well, the basement wasn't completed or wasn't finished until 2012. So there was plenty of time to see a collapsed sill plate. At any rate, we took pictures and everything else like this. And I stood on the ground. Then they sent me the original Rottler report from the termites. And all across the entire sill plate across the front of the house, it had X's that they found termite damage there. So I don't know about anybody else, but that doesn't sound like minor termite damage to me. And not when you're talking about involving an entire sill plate. So we did battle it out and I stood my ground. And then of course the seller came back and said, we asked that we wanted to see how bad the damage was to determine the cost to repair it. And he was really a jerk. So at that time, my client just said, this is ridiculous. I want out. And I thought, okay, well, here we go. But we did get out. And I held to the ground about the seller's disclosure.
Right, and those termites were so bad, they had worked their way up from the basement all the way to the roof, right, Carol?
Well, not in my particular, I think that was another one that you had, Lynn, where
Okay,
the
could
termites were that bad. But what we couldn't see, and there had been a lot of other things, they had just had all the wood floors replaced in that room. So I'm like, wait a minute. And he was unwilling to, pull off some plasterboard to see how bad the damage was. I mean, it could have been as simple as a $500 to $1,000 repair, if it wasn't the entire sill plate, but we couldn't see it and he wouldn't let us see it and he wouldn't do it. We got back our money and we walked.
Yeah, that was a battle, though.
It
Don't
was a
think that
battle.
you're always gonna win that, because that could have been ugly.
Right.
Could have held
But
our
I
peace.
think if we'd have gone into court with the pictures of the collapsed sill plate,
Yeah,
still and all, but
no,
And-
then you
and
have to go to court and pay lawyers and
right.
things like that. So-
Unfortunately, what I have to say is that she immediately put that house back on the market, never changed the status, and never changed the seller's disclosures.
Has it sold?
Yes.
Oh my God, so, well, I feel bad for the people that bought it now.
I
Right.
did too. I really wish I could have sent them the report, but I didn't think that would be probably the right thing to do, but it'd probably lose my license and get me in court.
Well,
So,
they'll probably subpoena you to come and testify on their behalf.
right.
Okay, well, we'll move on then. I think we have one more, Jamie. You represent the buyer. The seller didn't get all of the items out of the house until the night before closing and would not allow a final walkthrough until 8 p.m. And we're closing the next day at 9:30 a.m. During the walkthrough, you discover the sellers have taken the washer and dryer. Now what?
Was it written in the contract that
Yes.
stays?
Yes, ma'am. So by the way, just an FYI, this wasn't some little cheap set. This is a very nice set that sits up on the stands. Our buyer's really angry. And the seller responded that they have them in storage, and when we get ready to move them out of storage, we'll return them. So the seller offered our buyers $1,000, and our buyer wanted $2,500. So here we are the night before, and remember, we can't advise our buyers not to close. That is not in our vocabulary. They're not going to close. They need to talk to an attorney. So what happened, we got $2,500, but I want you to be careful about how you got that $2,500. You don't want to take a personal check, because guess what could happen?
Cancel payment on it.
That's right. So our agent drove over to the listing office title company, picked up a cashier's check, and then took it to the buyer at the other title company, and it worked out. But that's a problem when on these final walkthroughs, when we wait, and we really, our agent, he did his due diligence, but the seller wouldn't let us in. And it was a divorce situation, so it got pretty ugly. I think that's the last one we have. Is that right, Jamie? Oh, do you accept a personal check? No, hell no.
Never.
We have one more, number 18.
Okay, yep, okay. So you receive a call from your buyer, because where are they looking for houses? On Zillow. And they found a for sale by owner on Zillow. What do you need to do? What's
Get
the first thing you
authorization
need
to
do?
show.
Right.
What?
Contact.
What'd you
You
say,
need to
Julia?
contact the seller, get authorization to show.
Correct, because can you show a property without, you either have to have a listing or an authorization to show. So we're gonna call the seller and ask them if they'll cooperate. And if so, we're gonna get them to sign the authorization to show. But in this case, what if the seller says, yeah, I'll sign the authorization to show, but I'm not paying you a commission, then what are you gonna do? Seller won't pay you a commission. What are you gonna do?
You tell your buyer that they have to pay it.
That's right, Randy. So here's the other thing I want you to do when you're filling out that authorization to show, and it says the realtor is going to show the property to, and they want you to put your client's name in there. I don't want you to do that. I'd prefer you write in
I'll do that.
clients of Randy Brown. Here's what can happen. We think our buyers are loyal and they would never do this, but the seller now has that form, and they go and they look at the property. And guess what the seller can do with all the social media being the way it is? I can find anybody. I don't care what your last name. I can find you. I can reach out to them and say, you know what? I can sell it to you for less money if you don't use your agent. So let's talk about this. When let's say the seller's willing to do a for sale by owner with you, what do you suggest for a commission?
What do you mean?
What is, when you're filling out the authorization to show and you're asking them to pay you a commission, what do you typically charge them?
Whatever you have on your buyer agreement.
Yep, or if you have on there 2.7, because you realize that a for sale by owner, who's going to do all the work?
Yeah.
You are.
You are, for sure. So you might want to charge them 4. Don't discount yourself and do all the work for 2.7 or 3.15 or 3. I'm going to be doing both sides and doing all the work. I want more money.
Me too.
Anybody have anything to add to that? Because you all realize on Zillow, the for sale by owners can put their houses on there. You realize that, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. So like Randy said, you can always ask the buyer to pay the commission. Okay, so I had 2 special favors to ask of you today. Who wants to tell me what they were?
You want us to refer you an agent.
Yep, that's one. What's the other one?
Read that paragraph about loss.
Yes,
14.
thank you.
Paragraph 14.
So I may be calling you and asking you about one of those two things today. What you have for me. But I'm telling you that lost paragraph, we tend to kind of skim over it because, you know, it hasn't happened in a while. I had a listing, an agent in my office had a listing up by the airport when that tornado went through. Do you remember that?
Yep.
And the house was moved off the foundation by 3 or 4 inches, but we ended up selling it. It's still sold. It's not impossible. Anybody else have anything that's going on that you want to talk about?
I just think this is really, you know, we're lucky that you do this because it really
Oh,
clears things up. I
Oh,
mean,
thanks,
really,
Diana.
I'm sure not every broker is doing that for their, you know, people.
Yeah.
So it's not typically that this is done. So the new people know that Lynn goes above and beyond.
Oh, thanks, Diana. All right, well, you all have a good weekend.
Same to
Don't
you.
forget, thank you. Hey, don't forget, hold an open house, people. I'm telling you, there's people out there that you can get those sellers to let you hold an open house and invite the neighbors over. You might pick up a listing, invite the neighbors. All right, we'll see you all. Have a good weekend.